Okay, so good evening. We'll get started. So we have the privilege tonight to have Dr. Gavriel Drukier, who came down all the way from New Haven to give this shir. He's a Ph.D. in astronomy and a lecturer as well at Yale University, and actually has given shiurim in the past on the inyan of Kiddush HaChodesh. When I told people that there will be shiurim, there's Hashem on Kiddush HaChodesh, so people have told me they've gone to shiurim in the past, and even after the shir, it's sometimes a very difficult subject to grasp, and that is the reality. I think there's the known story with the Alter Rebbe where I believe it was with Kiddush HaChodesh, right? I think it was with the inyan of speaking about the inyanim of Kiddush HaChodesh, where lo yimotzi yedeim v'regleim, right? So if the Alter Rebbe was speaking to Ge'inim in Torah, and yet lo yimotzi yedeim v'regleim. Okay, so but even if a person, okay, we're now on the level of we're not going so deep, but just to basically at least get the grasp, and even if a person understood before 20% or 10%, and now you understand 30, 40%, so you've doubled your understanding and doubled your knowledge in Kiddush HaChodesh. So, Matev. Actually, B'Hashgacha, it's Chayalo also, so I'd like to mention we're going into Chayalo tonight, and it's B'Hashgacha because it's Shnei HaMa'edes, it's the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. And now we're going to be speaking about the lunar and solar cycle, also the inyan of Shnei HaMa'edes. As well, we're starting actually in Perek Echad, we're starting Sefer Ava today. So first of all, we're starting the Kiddush HaChodesh, very appropriate. We're starting, I believe it's tonight, on Chayalo. But also they're starting Sefer Ava, which is, Madar is the inyan of Das, which is Chabad, which is the Alter Rebbe. And Ava is the inyan of Avos Hashem, which is also the inyan to bring Chabad, to bring it into Midas, into Avos Hashem. And as well, it's known that Shema, we start off, a Yid starts off with the mitzvah of Kishma, starts the day at night with mitzvah Kishma. Shema is Se'u Marem Enechem, Udu Mi Bara Eile, that through understanding and learning about the concept of the lunar solar cycle and the mazalas, a person gets a greater understanding of the Bria, the creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and through that he gets more appreciation, and it comes to the inyan of Avos Hashem. I'd like to also mention that Baruch Hashem Egun Torah has set up many Rambam Shurim locally. There's no excuse that you don't have one at local next to you, or the speed that you like, or the person that you appreciate. There's many different shurim. There's 3 Prokim Rambam Baruch Hashem in 770. There is at 8:30 with Rabbi Yuzevich. There's at 10:15 with Rabbi Zalman Herzl in Hebrew. And the Rebbe actually wanted it that it should be B'chabure Dafke. That Rambam should be studied not bad bevad. And he says not even learning it by Chabrusa, but even bad bevad for sure not, and it should be B'chabure Dafke. So Baruch Hashem, there's even on Shabbos there was shiurim over there. There was shiurim Shabbos afternoon. There was shiurim Motzei Shabbos, and every night the shir is actually based on, like the Rebbe, from what I understand, the Rebbe used to do it at night for the next day. So it's set up that way that you're learning. You start off your day, you already know you did 3 Prokim Rambam. Comes at night, 8:30, you finish, you've done it. And then there's 1 Perek Rambam as well, many different places. Actually, after here, if you'd like, you can join. There's the Fabringen taking place in Empire Stiebel, which there'll be a Siyum Rambam on Perek Aleph Rambam from Rabbi Yomnik, which gives a beautiful shir by Rei Ma'uvim every night, about right after Maidev, right after Mincha. Before Maidev, he gives a Perek Echad. It's a beautiful shir, and he'll be doing a Siyum. Rabbi Lush, I'd like to mention that Rabbi Lush will be giving at 9:45 p.m. tonight. You can also join through Zoom. You can join us live in 770, 9:45 p.m. This will be in Hebrew. Tonight will be introduction and overview in Hebrew by Rabbi Lush, who's well known and famous for this. So no need for any introductions. And that will be in Hebrew tonight in 770, 9:45 p.m. Every night, Rabbi Lush will be coming here and continuing on with the shir in English. Tomorrow night at 8:15 p.m., he will be giving introduction and overview in English. And then the following nights, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, he will be going through the very hard Prokims, about 2 Prokim a night at 8:15 p.m., Yud Beis through Yud Zayin. So we hope you can join us, and whoever is joining us online, hope you can join us online as well. Actually, it will be, Be'ez Hashem, it will be archived, and will be, meaning besides that you can join us live, you'll be able to go onto igontera.org, and the videos should be there, Be'ez Hashem, available. And okay, so please support what we do. Help us by continuing and helping us support the ongoing Shur Torah that are going on. You could go online and support us also by coming and telling your friends to come and join in the Afatza of Torah. So we'd like to call for Dr. Gavriel Drukier should come and please give us the historical overview and about the lunar and solar cycle. Thank you.
Take care of it. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming. As was alluded, Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh is rather unique in the entire Mishnah Torah. The subject matter that it deals with is quite unlike anything else at the Rambam, anything else in Torah. And the way that the Rambam comes and deals with it is also really a unique approach. There's 2 main issues with Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. The first one is that when you come to learn it, it's not amenable to the usual sort of techniques for learning Torah that you're used to. So you sit and you learn Rambam, anything else in Rambam. You're sitting and learning Gemara or anything else. You've got the style of learning that you're used to take a sugya, to take it apart, to see what the question is, see what the answer is, put it all together. It doesn't work for most of Kiddush HaChodesh. That's one issue with it. The second issue that makes it rather unique is that it's about the only part of Mishnah Torah that doesn't have, at least for part of it, a source that's in a Jewish source. And the Rambam says there were Jewish sources for the details of the calculation of the position of the sun and the moon, and we don't have them anymore. You know, Bnei Yisachar had these techniques, and we no longer have them. They're lost. And so he says that he has taken the best approach that he knows and that he studied from the astronomers of his day, and that is what he's using in this particular sefer. That's what he's doing in these halachas. And you shouldn't be worried that it's coming from a Goyish source, because this is all subject to proof, and therefore you can rely on it. And I'm going to come back later to this question of what does the Rambam mean, that it's been subject to proof, there's raya, and therefore you shouldn't have to worry about it. Now, what's interesting about this part of and I'm mostly talking about the last section of Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, is that this is the part in Rambam where you actually see the Rambam's interaction with the people of his day and with the other intellectual sort of sources. There's a lot of such discussion in, say, more in Nevuchim, but that's not a halacha book. Here, the Rambam is dealing with his times and his colleagues. About the only other part of it really that he does with sort of his contemporary knowledge is maybe when he talks about the medical instructions in Hilchos days, and makes his advice of what you should eat when and such like that. that is, based on his knowledge as a physician. So given that the Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, it has this unusual content and unusual structure, it's worthwhile, to try and understand how he has structured it and what the Rambam is doing in here, and where it fits in with the history of knowledge up to the days of the Rambam. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. Broadly speaking, you can divide Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh into three parts. The first part is the first 5 Prokim, and it's almost exclusively halachic, in a strict sense of the word. It gives over the general principles of the Kiddush HaChodesh, that this is the way this is the way the calendar is arranged. That you have to make it. It has to be done by the Beis Din, and the Beis Din has to be in Eretz Yisrael, and then the month is determined by Re'iyah, by seeing the crescent of the new moon, and it has to be done in Eretz Yisrael, and he gives you a little bit of geography and says this is the part of Eretz Yisrael that's relevant. It's sort of introduction to the whole thing. And then he talks about the whole issue of the witnesses who see the crescent moon and they come to Yerushalayim, and exactly what the procedure is in the Beis Din, and how the information was spread out to over different periods around the world, around the Jewish world. And at this point, I make a first digression, and this talk is basically going to be digressions, to distinguish between two terms, between Molad and Chodesh. Now, everybody knows what the Molad is, because the Molad gets announced in Shul every day, every Shabbos V'Rochim. We make an announcement what the Molad is. And the Molad is a question that he's going to get to in the second part, when he's discussing the calendar. But the Molad is when the sun and the moon line up in the sky. So the way it works, let me pull up this, and for the people online, I'm putting on the screen printout, a handout that I've handed out in Shul. And if you take a look at the first figure in the upper left, and this is showing the basic model of the heavens that the Rambam is using in his various calculation. And the Earth is in the center, and then there's a galgal of the Yerech, of the moon, that surrounds the Earth, and the moon travels in this galgal around once a month, and then beyond that is the galgal of the Shemesh, of the sun, and the sun travels around that once a year, and beyond that is the at the end beyond that is the stars, which is the dotted sort of thing in the outside of the picture. And the stars turn around once a day, and as I say, the sun and the moon go around in their paths once a month, once a year. And necessarily, the moon is moving faster than the sun because it goes once a month, and every 29 days or so, it lines up. And when it lines up, that's the Molad. Now, the Molad itself you can't see unless there's an eclipse where the moon is right in front of the sun. Then you can say, aha, that's the Molad. But you're not going to be able, most of the time you can't see that because the moon, as we'll see, sometimes is above the sun, sometimes below the sun. The sun is in the sky, you can't see it.
That's north of the sun, south.
Yeah.
The sun is always above.
No.
Well, it's not directly above.
Yeah, as seen in the sky, sometimes the moon is above it, and sometimes it's below it. Sometimes it's to the right, sometimes to the left. That's the whole discussion that gets in the end at the end of part 3, where he's asking about the crescents. Because what happens is once the sun and the moon aren't lined up anymore, then the sun illuminates most of the backside of the moon and a little bit on our side, and you see a little crescent. And once the sun is set, then you have the possibility that you can see this crescent moon, and that's Chodesh, and that's the Re'iyah that's required in order to Mekadosh the Chodesh. That's the whole Ikir from Kiddush HaChodesh, is that somebody should see such a thing, see the crescent moon, come to Beis Din, tell them I saw it, and they say, aha, and then Kiddush HaChodesh, and we have a new month. That's the ideal, and that's what we talk about in Kiddush HaChodesh, in the first section. So we have this whole, what happens with the witnesses, and then we have a discussion about the fact that 12 lunar months is about 11 days short of one solar year. And since we have to keep Pesach in the spring, we have to every now and then add an extra month. And so he discusses there the procedure based in would do, what decisions they would make, but now we're going to add an extra month, now we're not going to add an extra month. This year we'll add a month, we'll add an extra other, this year we won't. And then he ends off this halachic section by saying, by discussing the fact that we don't have Beis Din anymore, we don't have Sanhedrin, there's no Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim, and so therefore we're not setting the date anymore, by the months anymore, by Riyah. And so this is the procedure that we have to, this is now the status that we are in. We have to be able to set the calendar in a different way. And that's the first section. And that is, I don't think people in general have a problem with that section of Kiddush HaChodesh, because it's the usual sort of thing. This is what the Beis Din does, this is what the halacha is, and second part is the next 5 Prokim. And the next 5 Prokim, he says, you should be able to figure this out. A child should be able to figure this out. This is simple, he says. This is the basis of how we calculate the fixed calendar. And in order to get through this section, you have to understand 2 things. The first thing is a little bit of mathematics. How to add and subtract with weird bases and multiply with, numbers that are that have factors of 7 and factors of 60, and that you take 3 days if you have 60, and you add, if you take 55 and you add 10 to it, that's 5 carry 1. That's one part of it. Is you have to get a little bit of algebra, a little bit of arithmetic figured out. But the other thing you have to understand about this is that what the Rambam puts in here, and what the Rambam is doing in the rest of Kiddush HaChodesh, is giving you recipes in a cookbook. He's not going into the detailed explanations of exactly why and how he's doing the things he's doing. He tells you, there's reasons I'm doing why I'm doing this. If you're a big Talmud Chacham and you know all about astronomy, you'll understand why I'm doing this. But just rest assured, I have good reason to do what I'm doing. And if you think that this is too much of an approximation and this is not enough of an approximation, I know what I'm doing. It works out. Trust me. But since I have to be complete in my Mishnah Torah and include in that everything that the Beis Din is going to need, that the Beis Din and everybody else Yid needs to know in order to fulfill the Torah, I am going to tell you exactly how to calculate the visibility of the new moon that the Beis Din would have calculated. But first I'm going to tell you how to set the calendar, because we don't have a Beis Din, another year. You do need the calendar. And you need to know when the Rosh Hashanah is, and how many days, and when Sukkot is. You need to know when the Chagim are, whether the year is going to be Malay Choser or Kesidron. You need to know all these things. And so I'm going to tell you how you do that too. And that's what happens in the next few programs. And what he puts in there basically is 4 or so cookbooks. 4 more recipes in the cookbook. The first one is how to calculate the Molad. That is when the conjunction is of the moon and the sun. And it tells you how to do that for any month that you like. And the procedure there is very straightforward. The first Molad was at such and such a day on such and such a time. And the period of one Molad on average is 29 days and 12 hours and 793 parts of a minute, where one part is 1,080. And you just figure out how many months there were between the first one and now, and you take that 29 and a half and a bit days, you multiply it by the total number of months, you remove all the extra weeks, because all we really care about is which day of the week it is, and we'll tell you what a Molad is. And that's how you do it. You just crank through the system. And for convenience, I'll tell you what the excess is, for 10 days and for 100 days and for 10 years and I'll tell you what it is for a 19-year cycle. And you'll be able to do this calculation. And if you follow his instructions, you can go and you can find out exactly when the Molad is going to be. And you can see whether the Gabbai announces the right number it's Elul, so it's not Shabbos Mevorchim. But after Sukkot, when he makes the announcement for Shabbos Mevorchim Cheshvan, you can find out where it tells you the right answer. It gives you the right number. That's the first cookbook. That's the first recipe. The second recipe is, okay, I know when the Molad is now for Tishrei. When's Rosh Hashanah? And it's a fairly straightforward thing. Depending on what time and what day the Molad is during the week, that tells you when Rosh Hashanah is. Almost. Because then the next recipe tells you is, how long is this year going to be? So I know what this Rosh Hashanah is. I need to know when next Rosh Hashanah is. And I need to know whether Kislev and Cheshvan are 29 days or 30 days. And I need to know whether it's a leap year or it's not a leap year. So it tells you how to figure all that stuff out. And then you can figure out how many days there are in the year. Next year, you go and do the calculation. You can go and follow the Rambam's instructions. You can follow it next year. It's the shortest year you get. And then he ends off by talking about the one other issue, which is the Tukufot. Right? So when the seasons start. And he gives you two different versions of that. For which one is the one that actually gets announced. It's actually shaykh to what you announce, and that uses a rougher approximation for the length of the year. And then he gives you a more exact number, so that you can show that the calendar is set up in such a way that there isn't very much in the way of drift in the actual date of Tukufas Nisan, and therefore you don't run into problems with Pesach drifting away from the spring when it needs to be, drifting back into the winter, and and the calendar that we have is sufficient until Mashiach comes, and then we'll have the Sanhedrin back, and everything will be back to normal. Okay, so that's the first two sections of Kiddush HaChodesh. And if you've worked through those Prokim, then you've seen the way that the Rambam sets up these sorts of problems. You see the way he has these lists of numbers that tell you how long something will take for a given period of time. And you've worked through also the little bits of arithmetic that you need in order to be able to do the calculations. Good. And these basic concepts are, in Masechet Rosh Hashanah and other places, this is where this stuff comes from, for the most part. Now, the interesting thing here is the actual length of the Molad. So I will digress again. You may ask, where did this number come from? And the way this number was calculated in antiquity is you just have to wait long enough. And you wait and you see that there's an eclipse. Like I said, that's the Molad. And then you wait till you see another eclipse. You and your children and your grandchildren, you wait enough generations, you see another eclipse at your location. And you know how many months have taken place between those two dates and days. And you also know how many years and days and such, and hours. And you just take the division one by the other. It gives you a very nice, precise length of the average Molad. Now, I once was giving a talk like this, and a fellow came to me who was also on the panel, and he was talking about Rambam, I think, as a physician. Good. He was from Yerushalayim. He said, I had a crisis of conscience. I said, what happened to you? He said, there was a solar eclipse in Yerushalayim. And it went dark. What was the problem? The problem was that the Molad that had been announced in Shul was a different day. It was off by a few hours. It wasn't the time when the eclipse was. I said, how is it possible that we got a time that's announced in Shul that this is when the Molad is, and I look up in the sky and the Molad is taking in a different place, in a different time. So I said to him, don't worry about it. The Molad that we announced in Shul is an average. And the real one is sometimes a little bit before and sometimes a little bit after. And the Rambam himself says that the reason why those dechiyas about when Rosh Hashanah takes place has to do correcting things so that the lines up properly between the actual one and the real one. So if the real one is not what we actually see here, and if this mean one is only reporting every month and announcing every month, so why do we announce it if it doesn't have any correspondence in reality? So the Rebbe talks about as a footnote in Likutei Sichos, and he says that the Molad that we announce is the Molad as it is in Shemayim. And when it comes down through Seder Shtalshelus to the actual real world, then it gets shifted a little bit one way or the other, and that's why the two don't align. So the one we announce is the one that's in that's in the higher worlds. So that's the Molad. Okay. The real trouble.
The Rambam says it's not because the Chodesh can be off. Why you put the Chodesh a few days? Because sometimes you won't see it. That's a day later or 2 days later, it's not exact. But the eclipse, I thought the Chodesh should be exactly the line.
No. Because the eclipse depends on the Amiti, on the correct one.
On the Amiti, yeah.
Which has deviations that the Rambam says that we have to have in order. Once we know the Molad on soy, we have to add or subtract those deviations.
That's regarding the eclipse. The eclipse also something regarding how to see the Levant.
No,
To see Levant, you're right.
No, but the eclipse also. The eclipse is the Molad Amiti.
Right.
Right. We don't announce the Molad Amiti. We announce the Molad. I'm sorry.
I thought the Rambam speaks about the day of Chodesh. That's what I'm announcing. That's why we off 2 days of 1 day.
Rosh Chodesh.
That's about the lining of the sun and the moon.
When he talk,
Okay, yeah.
when he's talking.
I guess I get misunderstood.
Yeah. So what's interesting in terms of Rosh Hashanah is that Rambam doesn't give the explanations that you have in the Gemara about for the Dechiyas that you have to do with, about Yom Kippur, not having 2 days fast, Shabbos in a row. He doesn't bring that. That's not the reason. He brings this reason, this astronomical, in a sense, reason for it. Okay. So the really difficult part that everybody runs into and has trouble with is the third part, which is basically from Perek Yud Aleph through the end. Or at least through Yud Zayin. And the reason that this is so difficult, and I say again, this is a cookbook, but this is a recipe. This is one of those really, really fancy recipes that takes a lot of work to come up with some very, very tasty dish. And what he does here is he's working through the various parts of it. I'm not going to go into details about how exactly he does. I'm going to tell you that what he's doing there is he's giving you various tables and numbers to enable you to go through the steps. But like he says, he's not explaining the hows and the whys, but I'm going to explain a little bit the whats. So the astronomy in the Rambam's days was a synthesis of two ancient strands of astronomical investigation: the Babylonian and the Greek. Now, the Babylonians had a calendar that was very similar to the Jewish calendar. It was lunisolar, and they were very concerned to be looking and detecting the patterns in the heavens. And they were watching where the moon was and where the sun was, and they came up with all sorts of formulas and calculations to be able to predict where the moon was, the position of the moon and the sun in the sky. But what they did was to, in all intents and purposes, there was just formulas. So it says, you add this number, you subtract that number, you do this, and then you figure out where the moon is. The Greeks, on the other hand, were really keen about geometry. And they like to have everything in a perfect shape and things like that. And they had their own interest in astronomy, but their calendar was not so concerned with the positions in the sky, with the moon and such in the sky, but they wanted to be able to predict patterns nonetheless. When Alexander the Great conquered Bavel, these two strands merged together. And the data and the technique and the information from the Babylonians merged together with the geometry and the physical concepts that the Greeks had developed. And what astronomy came was these geometric models to explain the positions of the planets in the sky. And the Greeks had their ideas, and they had some basic principles that they felt was necessary for any sort of physical explanation of a system. And these were that things had to be on circles, the circles had to move uniformly around their center, and that was the way it was. So the big Greek, the big guy in astronomy in those days, in the earlier days, was a fellow named Aristotle, and he was very highly respected by the ancient thinkers. And in the top, back to the top left corner, this is Aristotle's model for for the solar system. And I simplified it. I left out everything else. So I showed you this before. This is just the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun. And you have the Sun and the Moon going around on their circles. And this was a very simple model, and it doesn't work. You can't make such a simple model work to explain the motions of the Sun and the Moon in the sky. Because from our perspective, the seasons are not all the same length. Sometimes the Sun is moving faster in the sky, sometimes it's moving slower, sometimes the Moon is moving faster, sometimes the Moon is moving slower, and the like. So the more advanced sort of model is the one that I show you of the solar model. I show you in figure 2 in the top right corner. And this model was developed, and in the Rambam's day, this was the best version of this, or at least the quintessential version of this, so to speak, of this version of the model was from a book by Ptolemy, Claudius Ptolemy, not to be confused with any of the kings. He just had the same name. Not one of the Egyptian kings, even though he lived in Alexandria. And he wrote a book called the Almagest, which was like a compilation of all the knowledge in their days, and this was the physical model. I'm going to get into the details of this in a second. But the version, it's pretty clearly demonstrated that the version of the model of the solar system that the Rambam used was not actually Ptolemy's. It was by a Muslim astronomer named Al-Batini. And because the numbers in his tables in Kiddush HaChodesh are almost identical to the numbers in Al-Batini. So it's almost certain that that's what he based his stuff on. Okay, let's take a look at this figure. It's a complicated diagram because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on it. The blue dot is the world. The big black circle is Galgal HaShemesh. And in this model, the sun does not travel on a circle around the Earth. It goes around this center point, which is offset from the position of the Earth in one direction. Now, I've exaggerated the differences here just so you can see it. So the sun, in some period of time, goes from S to S prime, to S to the other S, to the S prime with the dashed line. That's the motion of the sun, and you can see that it's going around this center. Now, since the Galgal HaShemesh is off-center with respect to the Earth, so there's a point that's closest to the Earth, and there's a point that's furthest from the Earth. And this is the one that's furthest from the Earth is called Nabo HaShemesh, and this also rotates, but much more slowly, against the positions of the stars in the sky. So the sun goes around about once a year, or should I say by definition once a year. And the Nabo HaShemesh goes around about 1 degree in 66 years. So it takes a very long time to make a full circle. This is what we currently understand as being precession of the equinoxes. But for our purposes, and the Rambam's purposes, that is sufficient. Now, this is the basic solar model. The motion of the sun on its circle there gives you the mean position, the Makam Emtsoi of the sun. And if you go to the bottom left figure, again, we've got a simplified version of this. But now we're looking at, if you look at the sun from the middle of its circle, then against where you would see it in the sky, that's Makam Emtsoi, that's what we just calculated. But you're looking from the Earth that's offset a little bit, so the sun is against a different part of the sky. That's the Makom Amiti. And what the Rambam does is he explains to you, given that you've already calculated Makom Emtsoi, how do you correct it to the Makom Amiti? And that's chapters 12 and 13. Okay? So chapters 12 and 13 figure out where the sun is on its circle, and then figure out where you would see it in the sky from the Earth on the day that you're interested in, on the day that you're interested in knowing this. Now, for the Rambam and his colleagues and the people he learned from in Spain, this was a big problem. Because in his day, there was a sort of movement back to Aristotelian principles. They liked the circles. They liked the uniform motion. They didn't like this off-center thing, right? They didn't like it because the Earth isn't in the center. The motion isn't uniform. In fact, there's another version of this model, which I'm not entirely sure whether the Rambam is using it or not, where in fact the sun is not moving uniformly around the center, but it's moving around uniformly around a point that it's equal and opposite the Earth on the other side. They called it the equant. And then the sun's motion wasn't even uniform in its own circle. And for the people in the Rambam's day, for the astronomers in his day in Spain, this was a really, really big problem. Now, you don't see any hint of that in Kiddush HaChodesh, but you do see discussion of it in Moreh Nevuchim, where the Rambam, for example, complains about this unrealistic sort of behavior. He worries about when you go to the bigger planetary model of the whole solar system, about Galgalim that start intersecting with each other, that some models required. And his attitude to this was, you know, this is unrealistic, this is not proper. This is not the way the Eibishter really creates the world. He concludes, Shemaim, Shemaim Lashem, Mars Tamid Adam. So what does he do with it? So we'll leave that question for the moment. I'll come back to it. Let's instead take a look at the lunar motion, at the lunar model, which is in the bottom right corner of figure 4. And if you think if the solar model was confusing, the lunar model is like 10 times worse. Okay. I simplified the lines on it a little bit. Okay. Once again, you have the center. You've got this circle, this Galgal Gadol, that the moon is traveling. That that represents the moon's orbit to first order. Again, the Earth is off center, and in this case, I've moved it off center to the upper right. The moon's orbit, at the bottom of that little figure, I have a side view. So the top one is looking down. The one from the bottom is looking on the side. Anybody here is an architect or an engineer and knows how to do a plan drawing. This is what I'm doing. The yellow line is the plane of the plane of the sun's orbit. The ecliptic, we call it, is what's called in English. And you can see that the moon's orbit is inclined to the orbit of the sun. Okay, so half the time it's above, half the time it's below. And the place where it crosses the orbit, when you're going up, it's the Roshim, you're going down, it's the Zonov. Unless I got that backwards again. Yeah. So there's that. And since it's off center, again, you've got this point that's closest to the Earth and this point that's furthest to the Earth. I got it the wrong way around. It should be on the other side. No matter. The point is that those things all rotate too. So the closest and most distant point of the Earth of the orbit from the Earth, that rotates. The plane of the orbit against the orbit of the sun rotates. That's about an 18 1/3 years. And then it's not good enough for the moon to be on the Galgal Gadol. There's another circle. And the moon, that Galgal Gadol carries a Galgal cotton, and the moon is on the Galgal cotton. Huh? Cotton with a test. Sometimes we can't spell. Yeah. So the moon is then, and the Galgal cotton is then rotating around and carrying the moon on the Galgal Gadol, and the Galgal Gadol is rotating around the center, but not around the Earth. And then the orbit itself is rotating in two different ways.
Yeah, what's this black line?
The black line, that's the plane of the moon's orbit. That's the Galgal Gadol of the moon, and it's at a different angle in the sky to that of the sun. Right. So that's why, if the moon at the time of the Molad is at the Rosh of the Zonov, then you get an eclipse. But if at the time of the Molad it's anywhere else, then it's going to be either above or below the sun as you see it in the sky at the time of the Molad. And that's why we don't get an eclipse. This is why we don't get an eclipse every month. So this is the lunar model. And just like we've got the Makam Amsoi of the moon, you will then have to also calculate the Makam Emiti of the moon. Because that's what you see from the Earth, and that's where you see that's when you see the Molad. And that's when you're going to see the moon close to the sun to look for the crescent. So, just in case the model of the sun wasn't bad enough, the model of the moon has this extra circle on it, which was needed to do it. The other problem with this particular model is that when you include the Galgal cotton, it means that the moon is moving back and forth closer and further from the Earth all the time. So when it's on the side of the Galgal cotton that's closest to the Earth, it's going to be larger in the sky. And when it's on the other side, it'll be smaller. And the size of the circle that you need in order to represent the moon's motion in the sky, and this model works fine, except for one little problem. It says that during the course of the month, the moon should double in size. And we don't see that. The moon is basically the same size the whole month round. So what does the Rambam do? Because now we come back to the question. The Rambam originally said that, so anyway, so just to close the circle, this calculation of the position of the moon and the true and the average and true position of the moon is Prokim, is Perik Daled, Tesvov. Perik Tezayin deals with the inclination of the orbit and how far or below the sun the moon is. And then in Perik Yud Zayin, he goes and does the actual calculation saying, if this month, the sun is here, and this month the sun is here, and the moon is there, and at the time of Rosh Chodesh, will you be able to see the crescent moon or will you not be able to see the crescent moon? He gives you a calculation, a formula that you can say, that the base thing could then say, yeah, let's wait and see if the witnesses show up, or it's impossible, don't even bother, let's not even bother sitting. And then he ends off in the last two Prokim going back into the halacha, because he explains how the Beis Din would use this information. And then the final Perek is one more little cookbook. And the one more little cookbook is, now that I know where the moon is in the sky with respect to the sun, I can tell you what shape it should have. So the horns are always going to face away from the sun. So if the moon is on the north side away, then the horns are going to be pointing towards the north. And if the moon's on the south side of the sun, the horns are going to be pointing to the south. And if it's on the line and it's just a little bit past, then it's going to be pointing up from the sky. And so this is another little cookbook to make this little last calculation. And then the based-in would then be able to go and question the witnesses and say, did you see, what did the moon look like? To make sure that it isn't a cloud that they saw or something else. Okay, so that's the basic outline of Kiddush HaChodesh. That it's, the last section of Kiddush HaChodesh is taking these models that I've shown you in this diagram and using the standard techniques of his day to make one particular calculation. The one particular calculation is, will I be able to see a crescent moon this month or not? And if it's a little bit off, doesn't matter, we just need to know about right. Okay, so let me end off with, yeah.
What's pressure for the watch around?
So it has to do with this whole business of correcting.
Why is it? Why do we need this adjustment to be able to see the moon?
Let me finish and we'll come back to that later. Okay. Right. So the question is then, if it seems that this model violates the philosophical underpinnings of physics, and also doesn't exactly match what you see in the sky, then what does the Rambam mean when he says that there's raya for it, there's proof for it? And I think what he means here is not what we mean. In his day, there was a completely different idea of what constitutes proper science. They were not experimentalists. And I think what was satisfactory here for the Rambam, that he can say that there's a proof to it, is that it matched the data. It matched the observations. It's what they refer to as saving the phenomena. You could use it to explain the motions of the sun and the moon. You could use it to predict eclipses. You could use it to calculate the Molad and the visibility of the moon. And that was sufficient to the purpose of Kiddush HaChodesh. Because it wasn't that, because we already know, this isn't the way they did it in Beis Din, this isn't the way they did the Sanhedrin. But if you needed to do it today, this formula would allow you to do it. And that then completes in a sense the purpose of the Rambam in writing this. Because he's able at the end of Kiddush HaChodesh to take it back to the information at the beginning, to the basis of halacha, and the based in interrogating the witnesses, and we understand now that it's a complete system, and we complete then all of the required information that we need in order to fulfill this mitzvah, and that is the average purpose.
2 stories, 3 stories, 5 stories. Does the simple person know how many stories he sees the moon? He has to ask the witnesses how many stories he saw the moon. What does that mean, 2 stories? And you have to choose by another story, then you're plus minus. If it's only the difference of 1 story, you're okay. What does that mean?
So the based on this calculation, you know how far above the horizon is the moon.
Okay. What's the story? How much is the story, and how is a layman like me going to find out?
Okay.
The story is the moon above the horizon?
So when you're walking down the street, you see a building off in the distance. Yeah. You know whether it's 1 story, 2 stories, or 3 stories, right? Same thing.
It looks much higher than me. The moon looks much higher than 2 stories and 3 stories.
What? You're looking at a distant building, right?
Right.
Right. So distant building. This is 1 story. This is 2 stories. How far above?
We're all going to equal. We all going to say the same thing. Yet lay people will say the same. That was always a little bothering me.
They didn't have tall buildings. they had 1, 2 story. They maybe had 2, 3 story buildings. That's it. Other than basic things. I couldn't get to the over there. Have Yeah. All right. Anyway, I'm done. Yeah.
I always learn that the moon gets its light the sun.
Yeah.
So one shot, and this morning 9 o'clock, I walk down the street and I see the moon in the east. I see it's there.
Okay. Where's the sun?
The sun's probably
The sun. Okay. So the sun's up in the sky. You're at the end of the month. So the sun is here and shining on one side of the moon. Huh? The moon is to the east. The sun is at noon. It's this way, right? So, but the point is, it's close enough that the sun is shining on one side of the moon, and you can see. All right, the moon's in the west. All right, so now we're talking near the middle of the month. Today. This morning it's yeah. Yeah. And the moon's rising in the east. Yeah, because the sunlight is coming across, hitting the moon, and you're seeing the moon. The moon, right? It's at the middle of the month, the 15th. The moon rises as the sun sets. Right? So they're directly opposite in the sky. That's why you're seeing the fully lit size of the moon.
Why is the shape different?
Because as it goes around, you're seeing less and less. Because you're not seeing the full. When it's over like this, so the side that's illuminated, right, is this side that's facing the sun. But the side that's facing the earth is only half of that. The left side is illuminated by the sun. The other side is not illuminated by the sun. So therefore, you see a half moon.
You have a chance.
Yeah. All right.
We have mine if not.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we're done.
You ever went through this cheshbon domain?
Where are we?
This one,
There it is.
you ever went through this cheshbon domain?
Right. His second. Yeah.
I couldn't quite get. I have all the things in paper, and because that he says over here, the truth came out. Let's come out this way over here. Come over there. You went through it. Ich habe die ganze Papier.